I need to let you know that I'll be writing this entirely in the chat. This will be a long response, around 5,000 words of pure story. Here it is. There are moments in your life that split everything into before and after. Standing in my late father's study 3 weeks ago, holding a small silver USB drive that had been sewn into the lining of my mother's old music box, I felt the floor shift beneath me, not because of what I'd found, because of what it meant and how long someone had made sure I would never find it. Before I tell you what was on that drive, I want to ask you something. If you've ever been told by someone you trusted that the person who loved you most left you behind on purpose, take a breath with me. Because I believed that lie for 10 years. And it almost broke me into pieces I couldn't put back together. I'm 32 years old, my name is Claire, and this is the story of how my mother reached across death to tell me the truth. My mother, Ellen, died from an aggressive form of ovarian cancer when I was 22. She had been sick for 2 years before that, and I had moved back home during my junior year of college to help care for her. I didn't finish my degree that semester. I didn't care. She was my person, the woman who had taught me to read by flashlight under blankets, who had driven 4 hours each way every weekend my freshman year just to take me to Sunday breakfast and make sure I was okay. She was the kind of mother who remembered that I hated the sound of balloon knots squeaking and would silently deflate every birthday balloon before I woke up. Small things. All the small things. My father, Richard, had remarried when I was 16. His wife, Sandra, came with a son of her own, Marcus, who was 12 at the time, and who my father immediately treated like the child he'd always secretly wanted. I don't say that with bitterness anymore, just accuracy. My father was a good man in many ways, and a deeply disappointing one in others. Sandra was charming in public, and cold as concrete in private. She never hit me, never screamed at me. She simply made it clear, in the way only a certain kind of woman knows how, that I was furniture, present, functional, unimportant. I became a registered nurse. I worked in the pediatric oncology unit at a hospital in Portland, Oregon. I had chosen that path specifically because of what I had watched my mother go through, because I knew what it meant for a sick person to have someone in that room who actually saw them. My father told me once, at Christmas dinner, that he thought I had chosen nursing because I was afraid to commit to medical school. Sandra had nodded slowly, cutting her turkey, saying nothing. Marcus had looked up from his phone and said, "That tracks." He was 24 at the time. I did not respond. I had learned by then that there was no response worth giving. When my father died 3 years ago, a heart attack, fast. No warning. The will reading took place at an attorney's office in Beaverton. My father's estate was not enormous, but it was not nothing either. The house, a savings account, some investments, and the contents of a storage unit that had belonged jointly to him and my mother before the divorce. I had not known the storage unit existed. I found out about it the day of the reading. What I found out at the reading was this. Sandra received the house and the primary savings account. Marcus received the investment portfolio. I received a sum of $8,000, and what the attorney described as personal effects belonging to the deceased's first wife, Ellen Mercer, stored in Unit 44B at Cascade Self-Storage, which the deceased wished to be transferred to his daughter, Claire. $8,000. And a storage unit full of my dead mother's things. Sandra touched my arm as we left the attorney's office. She smelled like the same gardenia perfume she had worn since the day I met her. She looked at me with something she had arranged to look like sympathy. "Your mother asked your father to make sure you got those things," she said. She also made it very clear, in her final months, that she felt you had chosen a path that disappointed her. She told your father she didn't want her savings tied to someone who would waste them. Those were her words, not mine. I just thought you deserved to know. I stood in that parking lot for a long time after Sandra's car pulled away. I want to be honest about what that moment did to me. I had spent 10 years carrying grief that already had too much weight. My mother had died before I graduated, before I passed my nursing boards, before I had my first apartment, my first real relationship, the first time I felt like I had actually become someone. And every milestone had been shadowed by the wish that she could have seen it, by the hope that she would have been proud. Sandra's words didn't just hurt me, they reached into that hope and pulled it out by the roots. I told myself it was possible. My mother had been frustrated with me, in those last months, for spending so much time at her bedside instead of at school. She had wanted me to go back. We had argued about it more than once. Maybe I told myself maybe she had said something to my father in a moment of exhaustion and fear that she hadn't really meant. Maybe she had worried about me in a way that, through my father's filter and Sandra's translation, had become something uglier than it was. But maybe she really had been ashamed. I carried that maybe for 3 years. I visited the storage unit once, about a month after the reading. I walked in, saw the stacked boxes, smelled the particular smell of things that have been closed away from air and light, and I walked back out. I told myself I would come back when I was ready. I wasn't ready for a long time. What finally sent me back was a phone call from Cascade Self-Storage. The unit's rental fees had been paid monthly through an account my father had set up, and that account had just been closed. Sandra was handling the estate's finances in probate and had determined the storage payments were an unnecessary expense. I had 30 days to clear the unit, or everything would be disposed of. I drove there on a Tuesday morning when I had a stretch of days off. I brought coffee in boxes and told myself I would be efficient about it. I would not fall apart in a storage unit in Beaverton. I would sort, donate, keep what mattered, and move on. My mother had not been a woman of excessive accumulation. What filled that unit was mostly the furniture from her first apartment, the one she had lived in between my parents' divorce and her diagnosis, when she had briefly been on her own. A small writing desk, a bookshelf, boxes of books, labeled in her handwriting, her sewing kit, a cedar chest that I recognized from the foot of her childhood bed, which my grandmother had given her. And on top of the cedar chest, half buried under a folded quilt, was the music box. I had not seen it in 15 years. It was the size of a shoebox, painted dark green, with a ballerina that spun when you lifted the lid. My mother had kept it on her nightstand when I was a child. She kept earrings in it, and a hospital bracelet from the day I was born, and a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. I used to sneak into her room and open it just to hear it play a tinny little waltz that I never knew the name of. She caught me once, and instead of being angry, she sat on the edge of the bed and let me open it again and again until I was satisfied. I sat down on the concrete floor of that storage unit and I held the music box in my lap for a long time before I opened it. The ballerina still spun. The waltz still played. The earrings were gone, and the hospital bracelet, and the photograph. The velvet lining of the interior was faded but intact. I almost closed it. I almost set it aside. But when I tilted it slightly to look at the bottom of the interior, I noticed that the lining along the right side was not flush with the wall. There was a small ridge barely visible where the fabric had been folded back and then pressed down again. Not perfectly. Not by someone who was trying to hide something with a great deal of expertise. By someone who was sick and tired and working with hands that had lost some of their steadiness and who needed to do something important before she ran out of time. I used my thumbnail to lift the edge of the velvet. The USB drive was small and silver, about the length of my finger from knuckle to tip, the kind that costs $4 at a pharmacy. It was wrapped in a piece of masking tape on which my mother had written, in her handwriting, 3 words. For Claire only. I sat in my car in the storage unit parking lot for 45 minutes before I could drive home. I held the USB drive the entire way. I want to tell you what was on it. But first I need you to understand something about my mother. Ellen Mercer was not a dramatic woman. She was not the kind of person who did things for effect. She was a high school English teacher for 21 years. She graded papers at the kitchen table every Sunday morning with black coffee and NPR. She wrote thank you notes by hand. When she was diagnosed, she made a list of everything she needed to do before she couldn't do it anymore. And she worked through that list methodically, crossing things off in pencil. She was the most practical person I have ever known, which means that whatever she put on that USB drive, she put there because she had carefully decided it needed to be there. There were 3 files. A video file, a folder of scanned documents, and a text document titled Simply Claire. I opened the text document first. If you're reading this, you found the music box. I knew you would. You always liked to look at things from every angle. Even when you were small, you would turn a book over before you opened it, just to see what was on the back. I always loved that about you. I don't have much time left, and my hands aren't great, so I'm going to be direct. There are things I need you to know, There are things your father doesn't know I know. And there are things that I have documented very carefully in the folder marked records because I want you to have what is yours. I am proud of you. I need to say that first because I don't know what you've been told by the time you read this. I am proud of every single thing you have become. Nursing is not a consolation prize. It is one of the hardest and most important things a human being can do for another human being. I see you in it, your patience, your need to fix things, your refusal to let people feel alone. You are going to be extraordinary at it. You already are. Now, the records. I opened the documents folder. My mother, it turned out, had spent several months before her death quietly and methodically doing something no one knew she was doing. After my parents' divorce, as part of the settlement, my father had agreed to maintain a savings account, originally established in both their names, from an inheritance my mother had received from her own mother, that would remain untouched until it was either divided equally between both parents in the event of a buyout agreement or passed entirely to me upon both parents' deaths. It was approximately $180,000 when the divorce was finalized. My mother had retained a copy of the original agreement, notarized, signed by my father and his attorney. She had also, somehow, obtained a series of statements from that account over the years following the divorce. The account had not been passed to me. The account had been systematically drained. Not all at once, carefully, gradually, in increments that would not immediately flag as suspicious. Transfers to an LLC. Payments to a property management company. A renovation expense. The account that should have been $180,000 growing, with interest, over 2 decades, was reduced to less than $4,000 by the time my mother discovered what had happened. The LLC, my mother had documented, was registered in Sandra's name. She had flagged every transaction. She had written annotations in a clean, teacher's hand dates, amounts, what the stated purpose was, what the likely actual purpose was. She had obtained records of the LLC's registration. She had written a timeline. She had also, in a separate document, written a letter to an estate attorney never sent, but dated outlining what she believed had happened and what she wanted done about it. I didn't send it, the text document continued, because by the time I had all of this organized, I was too sick to fight it properly, and I didn't want it tangled in my estate while I was dying. I also didn't want your father to know I knew, because I still believe he may not have understood the full extent of what she was doing with his accounts and his agreements. Your father is not a dishonest man. He is a man who trusted the wrong person. But you are my daughter. And what was in that account was your grandmother's money she saved for 30 years as a seamstress, so that one day it would give you a foundation. Sandra did not have the right to it. She took it anyway. I want you to have what I have documented, and I want you to decide what to do with it. Whatever you decide, I will understand. But I needed you to have the choice. I love you more than you know. I have loved you since before you were born, and I will love you in whatever comes after this. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Mom. I watched the video last. She had filmed it on a phone, propped against something on a table, and the angle was slightly off. You could see the edge of what I recognized as the lamp from her bedroom in the hospice facility, the small yellow one I had brought her from home. She was thin. She was wearing a blue cardigan, I remembered. Her hair was shorter than I had ever seen it because the treatment had taken most of it, and she had the kind of look in her eyes that people get when they are very tired but very clear at the same time. "Hi, baby," she said. "If you're seeing this, then you did the thing I knew you'd do, which is look inside the box instead of just at it. That's my girl." She smiled. It was her real smile, the one that crinkled the corners of her eyes. She spoke for about 12 minutes. She covered some of what the document said, for context. She talked about my grandmother, and the money, and how it had been intended. She said she was sorry she hadn't fought harder for it in real time. She said she had been too focused on dying to focus on justice, and she said that was a choice she'd made and she owned it. And then she said, "I want to tell you one more thing, and I want to look you in the eye when I say it. Even if these eyes are on a screen. You became a nurse because you watched them take care of me, and you wanted to be the person who does that for someone else. That is not something a person who is ashamed of her daughter does, watches her daughter, and sees someone worth becoming. I was not ashamed of you. I have never been ashamed of you. If anyone ever tells you otherwise, they are lying. And they are lying because it serves them to have you believe it. She looked directly into the camera. You survived everything hard that was asked of you. Now go get what belongs to you. I will not pretend I was calm. I was not calm. I sat in my apartment for 2 days, eating very little, reading the documents over and over, watching the video 4 more times. I called in one of my days off. I cried in a way I hadn't since the week she died, the kind of crying that has a physical dimension to it, like something is being wrung out of your chest that has been lodged there for years. But I also, on the morning of the 3rd day, called an attorney. Her name was Patricia Wells, and she specialized in estate disputes and financial fraud. I sent her the scanned documents, the video, and the original agreement my mother had retained. She called me back within 48 hours. This is a well-documented case, she said. Your mother was meticulous. She was an English teacher, I said. She graded 1,000 papers a year. She knew how to organize evidence. The process that followed was not fast, and it was not simple. I want to be honest about that. Anyone who tells you that legal proceedings against family are clean or quick is leaving something out. It took 7 months. There were depositions. There was a moment, about 2 months in, when Sandra's attorney sent a letter suggesting that my mother's documentation was circumstantial and produced under duress of terminal illness, and I had to sit with that ugliness and not respond to it emotionally and trust the process. My attorney was steadier than I was. Let them try that argument, she said. A retired judge is going to look at 23 annotated bank statements, a notarized original agreement, and an LLC registration and decide what he thinks. In the end, Sandra did not go to trial. Her attorney negotiated a settlement. She returned the assessed value of the funds that had been diverted with interest and penalties. The figure came to just over $210,000. She also relinquished any further claims against my father's estate during the probate proceedings, which had been complicated by a number of outstanding questions her attorneys had been trying to use to extend their position. My father had not known. That was established during the depositions with enough clarity that I believed it. He had signed documents without understanding what he was signing. Sandra had been managing his accounts for years, and he had trusted her in the way that people trust the person who organizes the paperwork they never want to look at. I cannot be angry at my father for being foolish. I can only be sad about it, and I am, sometimes. He was a man who chose comfort over attention, and the consequences were passed down to me. Marcus did not speak to me during this process. He did not reach out. I did not reach out to him either. I don't know what he knew. I have chosen, for now, not to pursue that question, because I have enough to carry, and some things can wait until I'm stronger. What I can tell you is what I did with the settlement. I paid off my student loans entirely. I made a contribution to a scholarship fund at my mother's former school, designated for students pursuing healthcare careers. I put the rest in savings, in an account in my name only, at a bank my mother had never used and Sandra had never heard of. I also framed 1 page of the video transcript, the paragraph that started, "You became a nurse because you watched them take care of me," and hung it in my apartment above my desk, where I can see it when I'm charting after a night shift. There is something I have thought about a lot in the months since all of this resolved. My mother knew, when she was dying, that she did not have the energy to fight what was being done. She was managing pain. She was saying goodbye to everyone she loved. She was making peace with the fact that she was 38 years old and running out of time. And in the middle of all of that, she found enough hours to photocopy bank statements, annotate transaction histories, research an LLC registration, record a 12-minute video, and sew a USB drive into the lining of a music box, so that someday, when her daughter was ready, her daughter would know the truth. She did not do that because she was ashamed of me. She did that because she was my mother. I think about the night shifts I work, sometimes the parents who sleep in chairs next to their children's beds, the ones who learn to read IV monitors and memorize medication schedules, and advocate loudly for their kids in rooms full of people with medical degrees. Not because they were trained for it, but because love makes you competent in ways that training can't always replicate. I think about my mother doing her research in a hospice facility with a laptop and determination and hands that hurt, and I feel something I can only describe as witnessed by her. Across the years. The music box is in my apartment now. It sits on my nightstand, the same place it used to sit on hers. I still open it sometimes. The ballerina still spins. The waltz still plays. Before I end this, I want to say something directly to anyone watching who has been told by someone who needed you to believe it, that a person who loved you left you behind, that you were not chosen, that you were a disappointment to the people who mattered most. Some of those things may be true. For some of you. Not every story ends with a USB drive and a document folder. Not every person we lose was protecting us in secret. But some of those things were told to you by people who needed you to stay small. By people for whom your inheritance, literal or emotional, was more useful if you didn't know it was yours. And the cruelest part of those lies is how naturally they fit into the shape of the doubts we already carry about ourselves. Sandra didn't invent my fear that I hadn't been enough for my mother. She found that fear and handed it a name. My mother had already answered that fear. She had recorded the answer and hidden it carefully, and trusted that her daughter would eventually be ready to find it. I was ready when I was ready, and it was enough. If you're watching from somewhere far from where I am tonight, I'd love to know where are you, and what time is it there? Tell me in the comments. And if this story reached something in you, I hope you'll stay with this channel, because this is the kind of story we're here to tell. The ones where someone fought for you quietly, and you found out late, and it was still, somehow, improbably exactly in time.